on, the music always gets me. We are just 1 hour from the closing of most polls in the Michigan primary, with President Biden facing the possibility of a significant protest vote over the situation in Gaza, and Nikki Haley hoping for something, anything positive, with Donald Trump expected to easily win the Republican primary and the nomination. We will get to all of that shortly, but first, we want to set the stage just a little bit for where things stand when we talk about the Republican Party. So we begin the readout tonight with the freak show. This weekend was the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, a showcase of just how extreme the once grand old party has become. How extreme, you ask? Well, as NBC News is reporting, Nazis mingled openly at CPAC, spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and finding allies. Yes, you did hear me say Nazis. NBC News noted in previous years, conference organizers have ejected well-known Nazis and white supremacists, such as Nick Fuentes, from CPAC. But this year, racist conspiracy theorists didn't meet any perceptible resistance at the conference where Donald Trump has been the keynote speaker since 2017. CPAC has repeatedly denied it, calling NBC's reporting fake news and grossly manipulative, and even going so far as to smear the NBC News reporter who was there talking to those very Nazis that CPAC says weren't there, saying our reporter was carrying the water for Hamas in his reporting of the recent Middle East conflict. Really, guys? Well, NBC News has the receipts, including both photo and video evidence of prominent white supremacists attending the event. Now, unless this was someone other than a Nazi giving a Nazi salute in the lobby of the conference hotel, well, there you have it. They are letting literal Nazis into their den of idolatrous Trump worship. I guess it makes sense, since CPAC goes beyond just Trump worship by also serving as the coming together of those pushing white replacement theory and anti-immigrant bigotry. And not far from that conference in Washington, D.C., you have almost the entirety of the Republican Party in Congress worshiping Trump, too. You have this guy.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it.
Even Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who clearly knows better, is reportedly in talks to endorse Trump, despite the fact that Trump has repeatedly mocked him, reportedly calling him a done son of a B word, not to mention repeatedly mocking his wife and former Trump cabinet member Elaine Chao. McConnell is preparing to kiss the ring. And today, McConnell, along with Speaker Mike Johnson, who just last week made the pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago for the mandatory thumbs-up photo with the man pulling his strings, joined Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries at the White House with President Biden to discuss the looming government shutdown. Now, of course, if there's any potential to prevent a government shutdown, it's not McConnell or Johnson who will decide that. They will need to turn to the party's real leader, Geppetto himself, Donald Trump. And right now, Trump's concern has nothing to do with whether the government shuts down. He may actually prefer it, believing it will somehow help him in the upcoming election. Remember, he wants the economy to crash before November. And that is where his concern lies. Not to become president, to provide for the American people. No, no, no. It's all to save himself from accountability, from the 91 criminal charges that keep him awake at night. It's clearly driving him crazy. Just look to his low-grade Twitter knockoff, where he screams in all caps that all these fake political prosecutions must be immediately halted. And part of that is because he's also really worried about all those legal bills. And it's not just the tens of millions of dollars he continues to need to pay for his lawyers. There's also the matter of the more than $500 million he owes from his civil judgments, including the fact that the meter is still running on his New York civil fraud trial to the tune of $114,000 a day in interest, on top of the $355 million principal. That explains why he's so desperate to get complete control of the RNC, to help cover his legal costs. And to make that happen, he's pushing for Trump loyalists to run the RNC, including his own daughter-in-law, Lara Trump. And what you're seeing is the entire Republican Party rolling over for him, even though he is a weakened candidate, as we've seen, based off his latest primary wins, where he has lost about 40% of the vote, and faced problems not just with independent voters, but also with a large swath of Republican voters who are not willing to drink the MAGA Kool-Aid and who say they will not vote for him once he is a convicted felon. It's a problem that Trump may very well see again tonight in Michigan. Joining me now is Maria Teresa Kumar, President and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor, and Rick Wilson, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and a former Republican strategist. Thank you both for being here, my friends. Rick Wilson, Nazis, really?
Yeah, you know, look, there's a problem with this. My grandmother used to call it the turd in the punch bowl. Once you have a turd in the punch bowl, it's not punch anymore. Once you have one Nazi in the door, you're not a conservative organization anymore. You're a pro-Nazi organization. And the fact that these people were there on the floor, perfectly comfortable, the fact that these people are circulating there now, because they are all part of a philosophy that Steve Bannon infected the GOP with called no enemies to my right. Which is why they were fine with Charlottesville at a certain level, which is why they're fine with these people. They look at these people as their shock troops, as their best guys, as the people that are going to go out there and metaphorically or literally swing at their enemies.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Matt Schlapp should be ashamed of himself.
For a lot of reasons.
But for a lot of reasons. But he has no possibility of understanding just how corrupt and corrupted this is. Once you're okay with Nazis there, and like they clearly like to see the PR damage.
Yeah.
But the guys were in the facility, you know, giving the Heil Hitler. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. One is too many.
Yeah, and I mean, the Nazis have been marching in Tennessee, Maria, they've been marching in Florida, in some cases carrying signs, banners for DeSantis. He says nothing, they say nothing. Let me play for you just a compilation of some of what they were saying about immigration at CPAC, because what's driving this, the Nazis vote too, kind of keep them all in the tent kind of attitude, is that there is this like hysteria about immigration. Here they are at CPAC talking immigration.
The immigration issue is extremely simple. Seal the border, deport all the illegals.
Who the hell can win when you have 16 million people pouring into our country from places unknown? They have diseases nobody's ever even heard about. I'm sorry. I feel badly for the people, but we don't want to have this contagion in our country.
Our leaders are determined to repeat every mistake that led to the collapse of empires before us. Here are just a few of the common themes from history: mass immigration and infiltration by foreigners who don't share our values and culture or even our language.
Contagion. They get even a Jewish fellow, Stephen Miller, and Ben Carson, an African-American, to say it, to say the words, to say the things. It's happening.
I think one of the biggest challenges is for us to remember what was life under Trump when he was president.
Sure.
And it was a constant anxiety across all of America. And we seem to forget that those words that they speak of actually have consequences. It was the El Paso massacre, the person who conducted that Venice crime against Latinos that was inspired by Trump's then president's feed saying that there was a mass Mexican invasion, and 23 people lost their lives. Those words are going to translate into something else. And what my hope is that as we are going into the State of the Union from the President of the United States, is that he uses that opportunity to remind the American people the contrast between him and Trump, and that under his presidency, we are a thriving multicultural America. My concern is for that child right now who is of immigrant descent, which is the majority of us, saying, oh my goodness, I don't belong, and being othered and being bullied. There's so many incidences that we are seeing right now of racial profiling amongst ourselves that are not even reported because people feel that they cannot. And so what he is actually creating is an incredibly dangerous tension that is going to pit Americans against each other. And you know the only people who benefit from that? He will benefit because you allow grift, but then so do foreign actors and foreign agents.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, I'm glad you said we need to remember, because there is this mismemory where people are sort of trying to remember the Trump 4 years as the good old days. 1 million people died of COVID. Kids were being screamed at on basketball courts if they were Latino and called illegals and told get out of the country. I mean, it was an awful time, and people were so exhausted, they elected Joe Biden. But you know what Joe Biden is planning on doing right now? He's going to the border. Both of them, both he and Trump, are going to both do trips to the border. Now, the Biden team is saying they're doing it essentially to shame Republicans who refuse to vote for that border deal, which is, I guess, smart politics. But what do you make of the fact that the response on the Biden side, just as a strategist, is they too are going to the border?
Look, they're going to take away the one thing Trump claims he has, which is strength on the border, Biden has offered, and the Democrats have offered, the best and most balanced border security bill that's been out there in 45 years. And the people that are siding with the cartels and the coyotes and the smugglers and all the catalog of demons the Republicans talk about every day, the one guy keeping that border open is Donald Trump.
Yeah, demanding that they
He's
do
the one. And Biden has a chance to invert the alleged strength that Trump thinks he has. And if I were Biden, I'd go down there and say, he built a wall that was a joke that we paid for. He never did anything except talk on this. And the dangerous parts of the border, especially on the drug smuggling side, the fentanyl smuggling side, those are people who now rely on Donald Trump for their business model.
Yeah, and look, he's going in the midst of these polls. Let's just look at this. Is illegal immigration a very serious problem? 91% of Republicans say yes. 41% of Democrats, too. And so it's become a thing where it's increased among every single group from 2015 up to 2024. It's a shared concern.
Well, and I think one of the things that we all also have to realize is that by the time that someone gets to the border, Troy, that is not our immigration policy.
Right.
We have to recognize that the reason that we got to this moment was that Trump himself dismantled a lot of the programs where people could go ahead and file for some sort of visa or work permit in their home countries. And in an effort to rebuild that, you had COVID that really upended Latin America specifically. You had close to 16 million middle-class Latin Americans that went directly into lower class. They went into poverty, and there was no response internationally from any of this.
Yeah.
So as the president goes in and talks about how tricky the situation is, how it's a Western hemispheric issue, I hope he also recognizes that there are essential workers that are demanding relief, that have been here for 10, 20, 30 years, that have been paying their taxes, who have American children who are ready to vote for him if he actually recognizes their contributions.
But what he is saying, what Trump is saying he's going to do is just deport them all. He says he's going to deport 10 million people. He wants to.
How is he going to know who is?
I think anybody Latino is suddenly going to be targeted with deportation, or anybody with an accent, and anybody black or brown. I mean, he wants to formulate this program that's based on what they called Operation Wetback. Sorry for the horrible words, but that's what they called it in the 50s, and that's what he wants to do. It's a mass cruelty program, but what he's keying in on is that people are angry and they just want to see something cruel. The same people who didn't mind that children were being taken off of the breasts of their mothers as they're breastfeeding and essentially stolen from their parents. They didn't mind that. They want that back.
They want the cruelty, Joy. That's the purpose of their movement. There's no ideology or policy or philosophy. They want the show. They want the spectacle of cruelty. They want to see the kids being separated from their parents. And this idea that's fundamental to so much of what they're doing, of close the border, stop abortion, all these things, the core of it is this white replacement theory panic that they're all having. The core of it is a sickness where they believe that performative cruelty and mass deportations and all that somehow make them strong. This is a country that was always, it was never about blood and soil. It was always the propositional nation. You know, when my family's people came here in the 1800s, in the 1810s, they were German. They were the scum of the earth. And then we've had successive groups where everybody, who came in, they had that transitory moment. Right now, we are, I think, breaking a vital cultural vow that we made in this country to, when people come here and play by the rules, America was for everybody. It's not just for Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon.
Well, by the way, Stephen Miller's family was a family that came here by migration. So did Ron DeSantis' family. His grandmother got here like the year before Donald Trump's too, right before the immigration laws.
We don't level with each other because one of the reasons why we are enjoying such an economic bump.
Immigration.
It's immigration. It's 100%. Literally the folks that have crossed the border and said, you know what? And this is what we forget really unifies us. The folks that come to the United States as immigrants, they come with this idea that they can be the best version of themselves in this country. We are ancestors of entrepreneurs, and we forget that that is the lifeblood that, again, who is afraid of that? It's the Russians and the Chinese.
Yeah.
And we have to be very, very clear that what is happening right now on social media when they're trying to separate us, yes, it's the far right, but the algorithms fed into us are also foreign actors, recognizing that our Achilles heel is the racism, but that our unity and our multicultural strength is what allows us to compete
and
globally.
That is the thing that's sort of maddening, is that Russia doesn't have to like invent conspiracy theories to hurt the U.S. They just have to take the people's already existing anxieties
throw
and
gas
exactly
on that
right.
fire.
and throw
That's
gas
exactly
on it.
right.
And it's working. And it's working because people here are letting it work. Maria Triscomar, Rick Wilson, thank you all very much. Great discussion. And coming up next on The Readout, in less than an hour, polls will start to close in Michigan in what could be a crucial moment for President Biden, who is facing a progressive protest movement against him with the goal of convincing him to back a ceasefire in Gaza. One of the supporters of that movement, former Congressman Andy Levin, joins me next. Polls will be closing at the top of the hour in the Michigan primary. Now, one thing that we're going to be watching for is how President Biden does amid a protest vote movement over his administration's support of Israel in Gaza. He's faced significant opposition from not only Michigan's large Arab American and Muslim community, but also from black voters and young voters. President Biden said Monday that he's hopeful there will be a ceasefire in Gaza by next week. Appearing on Late Night with Seth Meyers, he discussed the potential path forward. The Muslim holy month of Ramadan begins March 10th. For now, Israel and Hamas have downplayed any hopes for a breakthrough in negotiations. But to be perfectly blunt, a ceasefire would help people stay alive in Gaza. But it also underscores the political challenge President Biden faces in Michigan. One of those protest voters is Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. The only Palestinian member of Congress said she was proud to vote uncommitted.
When 74% of Democrats in Michigan support a ceasefire, yet President Biden is not hearing us. This is the way we can use our democracy to say, listen to Michigan, listen to the families right now that have been directly impacted, but also listen to the majority of Americans who are saying enough. No more wars, no more using our dollars to fund a genocide.
But Congresswoman Tlaib wasn't alone among voters using their vote as their voice in today's primary.
I want President Biden to take us seriously, talk about the subject more seriously.
I'm hoping that it will tell the Democratic Party that they are making terrible decisions.
I voted uncommitted to let Joe Biden know that we do not support genocide.
I'm not so happy with how our government is running the foreign policies. Just the fact that over 10,000 children have died in Gaza is unnecessary and needs to be stopped. There should be a ceasefire.
No candidate will receive our votes if they continue to support genocide in Gaza.
Joining me now is former Michigan Congressman Andy Levin and Dana Williams, Dean of the Graduate School and Professor of African American Literature at Howard University. Thank you both for being here. I would normally do ladies first, but I do want to go to you first, Andy Levin. Talk about this protest vote. How large do you expect it to be? And what is the message that's being sent to President Biden? Is it not getting these votes in November or something else?
Hi, Joy. Well, it's great to be with you. The message is that we need this horrible war to end right now. People here are so upset about it. Yes, Arab Americans, Muslims more broadly, people of color, young people, a lot of the president's base, we're just beside ourselves here at the carnage in Gaza. It has to end, and that's the message they're sending. There are over 8 months, Joy, between February 27th and November 5th. So we're not talking about November 5th now, but I'm very worried about November 5th if he doesn't change course. So this is a huge message to him to change course, because you cannot get reelected as president of the United States without winning Michigan, and you can't win Michigan with this many of your base members upset.
And very quickly, what do you guys expect? Do you have an estimate? Because I know 10,000 votes was the goal, but there have been protest votes in every primary. It happens all the time. What would be considered victory for you all?
I think 10,000 votes is great. I think we're now expecting to get at least one uncommitted delegate to the convention, and I think there may be more than that. In Michigan's rules, if you get 15% of the vote in a congressional district, you get one delegate. So I think it's going to be a very successful night tonight. I tell you what, Joy, my biggest fear is not that so many people come out and President Biden, it's seen as like, oh my gosh, so many people are voting uncommitted. My fear is that people stay home. And he doesn't
couch.
get the message because
Yeah.
I don't think he can win in November here unless he changes course.
So let's talk about this because, Professor Williams, there's two pieces of what you have to do to win Michigan. You need a robust vote among the Arab American community. It's about 100,000 people, but also the African American community. You're talking about you really need Detroit to come out, right? So let's talk about this. Howard University, you all did something through Impact Research, a poll that talked about what black voters think. What did you find in terms of the feelings about President Biden and Donald Trump?
We're looking at all black voters, which is unique in and of itself. So it gives us the opportunity really to do an analysis at a really more intentional and complex level. So what we found, interestingly enough, was that the contemporary polls don't bear out exactly what we bear it out in terms of like where the support is. Some of the things, broad strokes, are absolutely true. There are some instances where black women are still the stronghold. Black women are committed to the Democratic Party. But what we're also seeing is that Democratic voters are far more liberal if they are black, and it doesn't matter what part of the state that they're in. So their concerns have shifted a little bit. And we asked them questions like, over the last 5 years, how have your politics shifted? And overwhelmingly, they've
shifted to the left.
That's right.
Let's go through some of these numbers really quickly. Joe Biden getting, in this poll of Michigan, black Michigan voters, 49% of the vote. Trump seemed high to me at 26%. Did that surprise you? And 9% for Kennedy.
It did, but I think there are a number of reasons that we can begin to think about that. It's a little bit higher in Michigan than it was when we did the national poll, which will focus on Super Tuesday coming forward. But those numbers vary based on religious affiliation, based on the issues that they identify with. So if you're asking folks who identify more with threats to democracy, the numbers shift just a little bit. We were a little bit concerned.
That it's that high. The other piece is that black Michigan voters, reasons that you wouldn't vote, don't like the candidates, don't think it matters, don't think it changes anything, and what would actually get you to vote, which I thought was really fascinating. 18% saying, seeing that my vote will change my life for the better. That does seem to be an important thing.
It is, because we are also trying to understand why people are making certain decisions. Our big thing really is getting people out to vote. It's nonpartisan, so we really want to know what would make a difference and where are we failing with messaging, because part of what we want to be able to do at Howard and with this public opinion initiative very especially is to make sure that we know that our voices are being heard.
And we've got last one, the concerns about Biden voters' age. It did show up.
Yes.
With Trump, it's morals, ethics, and his track record.
Yeah, I think that's, an obvious one. We're all very endeared to our elders in every way, but the reality is people are concerned about the age. What we didn't show as much as the concern about like the replacement. So I think black folks are still very comfortable with Kamala Harris.
And last question, did Gaza come up in the poll?
It didn't as much as we imagined that it would. We did ask the question very explicitly. We know that there are affinity groups and that black folks relate very specifically to to Arab Americans in Michigan, but the biggest number still for black folks were the economy, economy and jobs, which suggested that there's still a messaging problem because it's a strong economy and the unemployment rate is high. So messaging seems to be what the biggest problem is.
And so I'm going to come back to you, Andy Levin. What does the coalition look like in your group? Because I know, I'm just polling sort of the unofficial poll of just people I know of young black people. It seems to be a intense concern on Gaza, but this poll is showing that's not necessarily across the board. What does the coalition look like that's trying to send this message to President Biden?
No, Joy, I think you're right. I mean, young people are really upset about this. You've got to understand Michigan, right? We're the most intensely Arab American state. If you're a college student at any one of our campus, you're African American, you've got Arab American friends. And across young Jewish progressives, Arab Americans, other Muslims, there are many black Muslims in Michigan, right? And we've got in the black church, AME bishops across the country, and over 1,000 black pastors telling the president, this is unconscionable, you must change. So I think there is a really strong African American component to this movement, as well as a whole diversity of other groups. And we are saying that you need to change course right now. I think the professor is so right on the economy. I'm ready to go out and campaign for Joe Biden on the economy, right? I was so proud to pass the Investing in America agenda with him. We are creating a lot of great union jobs in Michigan and across the country that we can talk about. The problem is, Donald Trump won Michigan by 10,000 votes in 2016. And then Joe Biden won it by 150,000 votes in 2020. That itself is still pretty close.
Yeah.
And if a lot of young people stay at home on November 5th, it's going to be big trouble for Joe Biden.
And you said, Dana Williams, that it is about messaging, messaging, messaging. What kind of messaging were the voters that you all talked to looking to hear? What do they want to hear?
They really want to know exactly where the money is in relation to support for jobs, economy, affordable housing, health care. Obviously, reproductive rights was a big part of the conversation as well. The income inequality and racial justice were, or injustice, I guess I should say, were the top
Where
issues.
the money is being spent, where the federal money is being spent. I think I hear that one a lot, too. It's an important issue. Former Congressman Andy Levin, Professor Dana Williams, thank you both for being here. And coming up, when people show you who they are, believe them. Republicans are in full panic mode now that America has realized that they are trying to send America straight back to the 1950s with abortion and IVF restrictions and the looming threat of rights rolled back on birth control and even divorce. That's up next. Earlier today, the Alabama State Senate took up a new bill that would shield clinics providing in vitro fertilization treatments, or IVF, from legal action, at least until 2025. It comes after a ruling from the Alabama Supreme Court stating that frozen embryos are children and actual people could be held liable for discarding or destroying them. It's plunged the National Republican Party into full-blown freak-out mode, with several right-wing Congress members rushing to say that, yes, they support IVF, even though many of them previously backed the Life at Conception Act that could restrict or even make aspects of the procedure illegal. But Republicans have good reason to be nervous. Not only is IVF widely popular, but new polling shows voters are also worried about what might be the next target in post-Roe America: birth control. A new poll from Impact Research found that most voters across the political spectrum believe that their access to birth control is actively at risk. And 81% say they support the Right to Contraception Act, a bill that would ensure access to contraception nationwide, a bill that 195 House Republicans, including the current Speaker, Mike Johnson, voted against in 2022. Joining me now is Molly Murphy, president of Impact Research, which conducted this poll. Molly, thank you for being here.
Thanks for
Give me the
having
top
me.
lines. What did y'all find out?
Well, the first most important thing that we found out here is that birth control is popular and contraception is popular across the board. We don't need to split hairs and say, is it the pill?
Yeah.
Is it an IUD? Is it emergency contraception? Popular across the board.
Across party
lines.
Yeah.
Most people don't think this is a controversial issue.
Yeah.
And so they are now thinking maybe it is more controversial. Maybe these Republicans are coming for it. It's why you see 2/3 of Americans are concerned about their right to access contraception.
And I think finally people are waking up. We were talking a little bit about this in the break. People didn't think Roe was going to really go down. And now that it's gone down, they're having to really reorient themselves to what the possibilities are in their state. So if this is from your poll, if your Congress member opposed the Right to Contraception Act, how would that impact your likelihood to vote for them? 58% said they'd be less likely. Only 9% said more likely. How concerned are you that the Supreme Court will overturn the constitutional right to contraception, which they would? 61% say it's very or somewhat likely, 33% not too concerned. I'm surprised a third are still not too concerned, because they're going to do it.
They're going to do it. That third is the Republican ultimate base. And that's really who Republican elected officials care about at the end of the day. Pretty much anyone else who is not saying you could virtually do anything and be a Republican and I'll vote for you are saying that they are concerned about this. And this is a real shift from what we saw before the Dobbs decision, when people ultimately didn't think that abortion rights were going to go away. And the first thing we heard after that decision came down from people is, what's next? And so it makes all of these things more credible, and they're starting to think about these things. It's important to note that this poll was conducted prior to the Alabama decision. I think these numbers might have been larger if we had gone into the field this week as opposed to 2 weeks ago.
Well, what's next? Let's go to Missouri, where there's a total ban on abortion, where once you're pregnant, you are state property. They now have a new law which says pregnant women can't get divorced. So Democrats in Missouri are trying to overturn this law. It's a 1973 law. It bans women from getting divorced while they're pregnant. 3 other states have similar laws. Texas, of course, Arizona, and Arkansas. So once you're pregnant, you're not only state property, you're your husband's property.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I mean, and time after time, when voters are presented with this information, they're willing to vote on this information. That's another thing that this
So they
poll
have to actually be
finds.
presented with it in a
They have to
campaign.
know it. I mean, truly, if you are trying to live your life, you're not following politics, you're busy, you've got kids or you've got work and you've got commitments, you would never think in a million years, is there a law that prevents a pregnant woman from getting a divorce? No, of course not. And so the goal here is to get in front of people and let them know this. One of the things we also found in this poll is while most people, a plurality of people believe that it is Democrats who are pushing the Right to Contraception Act, they're correct. About a quarter of them believe that this is bipartisan. And the reality is it's not.
No, it's not.
And so I think getting in front of voters and telling them these rights are under threat, which you well know, and some of the things that you think are common sense. 68% of Republicans support the Right to Contraception Act. They're elected representatives. The people that they're usually voting for are not with them on
And I
this.
think one of the reasons people are confused is the New Republic has a piece about the hypocrisy here in this Alabama ruling. So there's a woman named Michelle Steele. She tweeted on Thursday, she's a congresswoman. She tweeted, as someone who struggled to get pregnant, I believe all life is a gift. IVF allowed me, as it has so many others, to start my family. Steele's solidarity with Alabama and IVF patients rings pretty hollow considering she co-sponsored the Life at Conception Act, which could make IVF illegal. So these politicians are saying, I'm for IVF, but they're actually voting to make it illegal.
That's right. And Michelle Steele is a Republican congresswoman. Republicans have control of the House of Representatives. She is in a position to do something about this. What is she doing? She's not going to. So these are incredibly hollow words. And in fact, I think we'll see in the Senate that they're going to block Senator Duckworth's bill. And all of these words about I support babies and I support families is fine, but show me what you're going to do about it.
They're also against, like, you know, student nutrition, kids getting school lunch. Like, they're not really for anything that has to do with kids. Is this, in our previous segment, we talked about the fact that it's a lot of messaging issue. It's a question of people don't know, so they're not acting on knowledge. They don't. Is this also a situation where if Democrats were messaging on this, it would actually be more impactful?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we saw that in 2022. From the time the Dobbs decision came down, to the time that voters voted across the country, this was a relentless conversation about the threat to abortion rights. And we saw that that worked, especially in places that had competitive elections. If you don't talk about it, people are not going to find it on their own. So this is an incredibly important thing to continue to drive. It extends the conversation beyond what people already know, which is abortion rights in this country are now under threat. People are waking up to that reality, but now they need to know what else is coming down the pike. And I think these opportunities, like what happened in Alabama, allows Democrats to say, we are not spinning a tale here. This is the truth. This is happening. Look around you. And we see this. 2/3 of people are worried that these restrictions are going to keep happening in other states.
And they are going to. And I think the reality is, believe them. They said they're going to do it. They're going to do it. Molly Murphy, thank you very much. Thank you for doing this research. And coming up, Tennessee saw all the recent Republican chaos and draconian laws and said, hold my beer. More with Democratic State Representative Justin Jones, one of the iconic Tennessee Three, next. As you have probably noticed, things have gotten really out of control in Alabama, Missouri, Texas, Florida, and Tennessee. Just last week, neo-Nazis marched down the streets of Nashville in broad daylight, carrying flags with swastikas. While those modern-day Hitler fans were marching in the streets, Tennessee House Republicans were passing laws that banned different flags. On Monday, they approved a bill that would ban ideological flags in schools, including pride flags and Black Lives Matter flags. It will not surprise you that the bill does not, I repeat, does not explicitly prohibit the display of the Nazi or the Confederate flag in schools, because there's nothing wrong with those. Republicans have also advanced a bill that would make street protests a felony. Democrats pointed out that such a law would have prevented John Lewis and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from marching at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee has also signed a law that allows public officials to refuse to perform same-sex marriages if it goes against their beliefs. While Republicans are clearly targeting same-sex couples, the law opens the door to people refusing to marry people for a whole host of reasons, including race, religion, and national origin. Joining me now is Tennessee State Representative Justin Jones. Representative Jones, what in the hell is going on in your state?
Well, Joy, the former Confederacy continues to be a birthplace of bad ideas.
Clearly.
And the terrifying thing is that this is where they're testing out these ideas before they nationalize them, that these ideas are being waged, the battles are being waged on the front lines of our state houses, but they're going to be nationalized if we don't stop them at their root, which is in states like Tennessee and Alabama and Texas and Mississippi. Yeah. These are the front lines where we have to fight for democracy.
I saw I reposted, actually, your Instagram, because you were actually there when the Nazis were marching through Nashville. How is it that they're now pushing through a law that would ban marches for Black Lives Matter, but not Nazi marches?
I mean, they're showing us who they are. Just yesterday, as I tried to tell them that their policies attacking immigrants, attacking the LGBTQ community, banning Black history, are inviting these neo-Nazis to come, I was silenced by the Speaker of the House and stopped from speaking. And when we try and raise these concerns that we are welcoming hate, at the same time we are banning pride flags from our schools, I mean, it is creating this morally insane environment where you're not even engaging. There's the saying, speak truth to power. We're speaking truth to insanity. At least we're trying to when we're not silent.
I think we have a picture of you with your hand raised. I mean, this was, and you said it was 2 hours. We were talking in the break, it was like 2 hours of you not being recognized, not being allowed to speak, silenced to get on the floor. They're now pushing through a law that if you are expelled, which you were, and Justin Pearson and, of course, Ms. Gloria were also expelled, you couldn't actually run again. That's their new plan. Do you think they're planning to expel y'all again?
I mean, and that bill passed the House last night I wasn't even allowed to speak on that bill. And this is just showing us that they are so intent on silencing voices of dissent because they're trying to show us that this is not a multiracial democracy anymore. And so there are threats that we may be expelled, but we're not afraid of that because what they're trying to do is intimidate us. These are tactics of intimidation. These are tactics of trying to re-wage their lost fight last year when they expelled us and we walked back 3 days later. This is what they're trying to stop, but they cannot stop the momentum, the movement, the light that is shining in Tennessee and across the South.
There was even an attack on a Grammy winner. So there was a proclamation that was supposed to honor Allison Russell, who is a Black country music artist, but allowing a similar measure to pass for a group called Paramore, who are white. That seems so obvious that you would think they wouldn't try it, but they did.
They did. I mean, they went after a Black queer immigrant woman who has spoken about a more inclusive state and who had a song that she won a Grammy for called Eve is Black, and they didn't like the title.
They didn't like the title?
They didn't like the title of the song because, again, trying to erase people's identity, trying to erase reality and erase history.
Let's talk about these last two things, because the one about pride flags being banned, what would that mean? So you couldn't have a pride flag in your class. Would that actually mean you'd be fired?
You can be
arrested.
I mean, you can be fired. You can be sued. I mean, this is just the madness that we're dealing with. Is that when they were questioned, they had actually an amendment to make so you can keep Confederate flags in classrooms because they're considered "quote unquote" battle flags. But pride flags, which say you are welcome here, which are about inclusivity, they feel are a threat to their dominant narrative of white Christian nationalism. That's really what this was about last night. And rather than address this and answer questions, the sponsor and the speaker were cowards and chose to shut down debate and not let us even talk about this and ask the questions that our constituents sent us down there to ask.
Is there any sign that voters in Tennessee are going to start punishing Republicans for this? Because we could just do 10 more of these. I was telling you, I watched the Tennessee Holler on social media. They do 10 of these a day. Is there any sign that voters have had enough and are going to start voting these people out?
I mean, we're seeing a movement that is rising up, that is multiracial. We're seeing people in rural counties saying we're tired of this because they're getting ready to vote on vouchers, which are going to destroy these rural public school districts. And so we already have more rural hospitals closed per capita than any other state. And so either they're going to wake up or they're going to find themselves in a place where, that they can't get out of. And so what is happening is that we need to continue to shine light to show that they're hurting their own people when they're attacking public education, when they're keeping people in poverty, jobs, when they're denying them health care. This is your rural district. And so we need people to say that, to put that reality over these tactics of division of white supremacy, because that's their strategy, is to divide us and make us not talk about how we are fighting the same system that is a small group of extremists who are controlling our state.
The last bill I want to talk about is this marriage bill, because it does appear that it will allow public officials to refuse to marry people based on LGBTQ. But is there anything that would block somebody who, there was a famous Tennessee pastor who 10 years ago said he wouldn't marry people that were interracial couples. Could that also be, somebody could say, I'm not going to marry an interracial couple?
I mean, this is what this is opening the door for. And this is what they want to open the door for. They're taking us back in time. Literally, Joy, every day we're in that building, you got to set your clock back 50 years because that's what's happening. And so this is terrible, but really what it should be clarifying for us.
Yeah.
That we have to take these people seriously. We have to fight them. This is not a time to try and make friends with these folks, these extremists in our legislature. Like I tell them, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make change for my district. And what that means, being silenced or being expelled, whatever it means, we're going to fight for their people too, for their constituents too. And I hope that the people of Tennessee, the Republicans particularly, wake up and say that these folks are not serving their interests, because what is happening is that they are using them as pawns and getting them to come out and say, this is about beating up on a few young black men, but really this is about beating up on our system of democracy that is silencing them and serving corporate interests. That's what's
and allowing the gun lobby to just run rampant, because anything to do with guns, that will pass. Anything that will make it easier.
That's the only bill we passed after the shooting, the mass shooting in Nashville, was a bill protecting firearms manufacturers from being sued. The only gun bill we've passed in Tennessee since that mass shooting that got national attention last year.
The last time you were here, you were moving to have the speaker sanctioned for his actions as speaker and his attacks on yourself, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson. Any movement on that?
So we have filed our motions. They filed a response. We filed a response motion to that. My attorneys are, now we're waiting for the judges to respond. But Speaker Sexton continues to act unconstitutionally. He continues to be the George Wallace of the 21st century, the Bull Connor of the 21st century. And they're trying to ban history because when history looks down on where he stood in this time, his children will be ashamed, and that he's shaming the South. But we represent a new South, and we're unafraid.
You definitely are unafraid. That is for sure. Tennessee State Representative Justin Jones, glad you were in D.C. and able to come on set and talk with us. Good luck and Godspeed. We'll be right back. We are seconds away from most of the polls closing in tonight's pivotal primary in the state of Michigan. Special coverage led by my colleagues Chris Hayes, Alex Wagner, and of course, Steve Kornacki at the big board is going to start in literally 12 seconds. If you are in line, stay in line. Your vote counts. Don't get out of line, but polls are going to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, and here we go. Stay with us.
Just 15 minutes from now, the polls in those 4 Michigan counties that observe Central Time will be closed. We expect to get a better characterization of the race at that time in both the Democratic and Republican primaries. The numbers are already pouring in from Michigan's 79 other counties, giving us an early look at how these contests are shaping up. Head back over to Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, what are you seeing now?
Well, not much change. We just have one more county here from the Upper Peninsula. We got a little bit of the vote in. But again here, the other one that it lights up and people might be curious about because we highlighted it earlier, we do have some votes coming in from Macomb County, but it's barely any, just to give you a sense here. This is, again, one of the 2 major northern suburban counties outside Detroit. And in Oakland County, we talked about Oakland County being sort of the opportunity county for Nikki Haley. Demographically, it's right smack in the middle of what's been her wheelhouse in South Carolina and New Hampshire in terms of voters with college degrees, higher incomes, suburbanites. And then Macomb, where we're looking right now, just to the east of Oakland, that is the blue collar, the big blue collar suburban county of Detroit. And again, it's a tiny amount of vote in here, but we expected coming into tonight that it's going to be a pretty big contrast between Oakland and Macomb, that Trump would win Macomb and would win Macomb, frankly, by a very, very wide margin. What Haley needed to do when we said Oakland's an opportunity county for her was offset what Trump is getting out of Macomb with Oakland, and instead, now more than half the vote. It continues to slowly tick up, and she's at 31.5% in Oakland. And again, this county and Washtenaw County, these should be Haley's 2 best counties in the very, very highly populated southeastern part of the state. And the best she's managing in either one of them, with a significant vote in now in Washtenaw County, is just 42%. And so again, with all these other areas of the state that are going to be very, very Trump heavy, that's adding up to something. If this dynamic holds, that's adding up to something far less than she got in South Carolina and New Hampshire. Though, again, we say the big wild card, we're still waiting here. 17% of the vote, that's about 1 out of every 6 votes in this primary, are still going to come out of this Grand Rapids area, this Holland, Michigan, Ottawa County area, even Kalamazoo County, which is down here, but there's almost no votes there. It's red for Trump, but look, it's almost no votes in yet. But this is the area where Trump struggled the most in the 2016 primary, and this is the part of the state in the general election, traditionally Republican, that swung the hardest away from Trump in 2016 and even further in 2020. So again, this is the big remaining opportunity zone for Nikki Haley. And again, if she wants to keep this number at 32% and even tick it up, this is where she's got to really got to land a punch here, because so far what we're seeing in Oakland and Washtenaw, which would be two big opportunities for her, are swings and misses.
All right, Steve Kornacki, we're going to keep looking as those numbers come in. We're now approaching 9 p.m. here on the East Coast when the final polls will close in Michigan's Republican and Democratic primaries. We're starting to see the results of a race that has been a test for both parties in different ways and a kind of temperature check on some of the discontent and division among each coalition. Claire McCaskill is a former Democratic senator of Missouri, and she joins me now. Let's talk about the conundrum that politically Joe Biden faces on Israel-Gaza, which is an issue that is going to divide the coalition no matter what. It is literally the most polarizing issue, probably in global politics. And the nature of the Democratic coalition, as you heard the Democratic mayor of Dearborn, is such that there are people on each side of that issue deeply and passionately inside the Democratic Party tent.
Yeah, it's so emotional. I mean, this isn't your typical political issue. No. This is one that people feel deeply and sincerely. And I do think Joe Biden is going to have to confront Bibi Netanyahu. I think he's going to have to go after him hammer and tongs with the way he has conducted this. And frankly, you know, if you look at what's going on in Israel, Bibi Netanyahu is really kowtowing to a very far-right coalition that put him in power. Yep. And he's not really doing the job the way it should be done. And Biden has an opportunity there. But also, Chris, we have to remember, I mean, let's look at the Ann Arbor numbers. Joe Biden didn't win Ann Arbor. Bernie Sanders won Ann Arbor.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
So some of these areas have never been Biden country.
Yeah,
they have been really many more people that were further left and didn't like the idea of a moderate carrying the flag of our party.
Yeah.
If you're the elites of the Democratic Party, if you're the Biden White House, how concerned are you really about this faction of uncommitted voters staying home in November?
Well, I think there's a danger on both sides here that people are going to stay home. I think you've got traditional Republicans that no way they will vote for Joe Biden, and no way they will vote for Donald Trump. So there's going to be some people that are going to hold their nose and vote, and then there's going to be people that just stay home. The question is, will the Biden campaign be able, and by the way, there are no elites in our party, Alex.
Yes, sorry.
No elites.
Term doesn't exist, actually.
I know you didn't mean that.
It doesn't exist.
But the question is, can Biden draw the kind of contrast around some issues like guns and abortion and, frankly, autocracy and what Trump is saying he's going to do? I mean, he's going to tear up
dictator on day one.
Dictator on day one.
And there's interesting. I was looking at some statewide polling today. One of the things you see consistently in Michigan statewide polling is this is a state with a popular second-term Democratic governor who is still, in her second term, above water in favorability.
Which is amazing.
Which is not happen. Usually you start to go down, right? There is a lot of upside for Democrats in that state. They have performed very well in the last two elections there. They've passed a lot of legislation. They've won a statewide ballot on abortion. They have a popular Democratic governor. Joe Biden, according to the polling, is below those benchmarks. But it also means there's a bunch of voters in those states who have been pulling the lever or casting their vote for Democrats in the last few elections where there are obvious, clear, gettable votes for the presidential campaign.
It'd be a big mistake to take Michigan for granted. On the other hand, they haven't had a Republican senator in a long, long time.
What do you think Nikki Haley's game is right now? I mean, if she does measurably worse than she has been doing, what is the calculation here?
Is she waiting for the convention or is she waiting for a conviction?
Well, right, the rapture. But
even if he's convicted,
exactly.
Right,
If he's convicted, is not Donald Trump Jr. who the party chooses at the convention? Surely it's not the person who's been the Benedict Arnold, if you will, in this whole primary process.
You know, honestly, what I think happened? I think a couple of months ago, her gut kicked in and she just said, I'm done. And I'm going to say it like I really believe it. Because I think she was so careful for the first, year she was running to never go against him, never say the things that she says now very easily, that it would be, I think she said today it would be suicide for our country to elect him again. That's pretty bold.
Last question just for you quickly on that, on the Haley question is, there's also the after Super Tuesday question, which is, does she pack it up then and then do the Lindsey Graham, right? The sort of bend the knee. And everyone always says, well, they'll never get back in the tent. And everyone does, right? It's not like there's a thing you can say that you can't.
Bannon is back in
exactly.
the tent.
Right?
I don't know. with this guy.
Yeah.
She's a woman. He's not very kind to women in the first place.
Yeah.
He really does not like folks that aren't loyal. Bannon may have gotten back in, but probably had something to do with money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, Bannon can help him raise money and in that realm. So I don't know that she gets back in, and it'll be interesting to see if she even tries.
Yeah.
There is certainly a double standard for women when it comes to Donald Trump. The great Claire McCaskill, it's always so wonderful to have you.
Good to be with you.
In the flesh, no less. Thank you for your time,
You bet.
as always. I don't know, Chris, it's we are counting down the minutes and seconds until the polls close across the state of Michigan. But in advance of that, I just wonder, you know, as we talk about all of this, whether you think that something big is going to come out of Michigan, given the fact that both parties have a stake in the results tonight, whether we're going to see any kind of measurable difference in the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, look, I think the messaging that Claire just talked about, I mean, it is appreciably the case in all the public opinion data we have that there has been erosion over time within the Democratic coalition for Israel's war effort. I think that, you know, what that amounts to is all, you know, a question, but this is from the perspective of the folks who are trying to get them to change course, this is a sort of ideal time because of that trajectory. And you wonder how much whatever happens tonight is another nudge in that direction. In direction I think they're already moving. The Trump people are like, they're going ahead. Like everyone, it's just like they're behind the wheel with a blindfold and like a fifth of vodka, and everyone's just on like.
They have no recourse, right? Like he has his hands on the wheel.
Yeah,
you know?
everyone's untroubled. I would be more stressed out, but they're not stressed out.
Donald Trump is not stressed out about this clear schism that's happening within the Republican Party, the clear dissent that exists. We are seeing it proven out in the polls. And look at that. We have an election alert. It is almost in a matter of seconds. It is going to be 9 o'clock on the East Coast. And when that happens in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the polls will have closed as they have right now across the entire state of Michigan. At this time, NBC News projects that Donald Trump will win the Michigan Republican primary. That is our election projection. Donald Trump, the projected winner of the Michigan primary. NBC News can also now project that President Joe Biden will win the Michigan Democratic primary. Again, Joe Biden, projected winner of the Michigan Democratic primary. Let's head over to Steve Kornacki, who is where he always is, his post at the big board. Steve, what are the latest numbers here?
Yeah, well, you can see if you've been following for the last hour, the story has been really the difference between the polls being open and closed in Michigan is Gogebic, Iron, Dickinson, Menominee together a combined 0.5% of the statewide vote. So everything else has been closed for an hour. But now that the Wisconsin border counties are closed, we can make that projection. But it's been evident to you if you've been watching it for the last hour what's been happening here. And one of the things is as more and more vote has been coming in, it was initially very concentrated right here in southeastern Michigan, but more votes from the rural areas up north are starting to come in. Some of the UP is starting to come in, and that Haley number has continued to tick down and down ever so slightly. Now she's just over 30% at 31%. Now Trump a better than 2-to-1 lead over Nikki Haley. And we mentioned, if you were watching just a few minutes ago, in southeastern Michigan, the two counties where Haley we think is going to do best tonight, and where if she wanted to have a strong showing statewide, it really needed to show, was one, the major suburban county of Oakland County. More than half the vote is in there. She's barely above 30%. This is a county, frankly, for Haley to be making a statement in Michigan, she would need to be winning. And what should be her best county in the state, quite possibly, would be Washtenaw County, University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan University. And even there, now 70% of the vote is in, and she's losing by almost 12 points to Donald Trump. So everywhere else around there, and certainly in the rest of the state, gets worse and worse for Haley. And it raises the question of whether she's even going to be able to finish, I think, above that 30% number. Remembering, she got 43 in New Hampshire. She got 40 in South Carolina. What could still buttress Haley's support would be, we've mentioned this corner of western Michigan, around Kent County, where Grand Rapids is, around Ottawa County. This is where Holland, Michigan is. And you see we have a little bit of vote in. It's almost nothing, but I can show you from Ottawa County. We do have about 1% in, and that initial 1%, if it's a harbinger of anything, would be terrible for Haley, because this should be, outside of those two counties I just showed you, her best area in the state. There's a 5-county region here that's about 17% of the statewide Republican primary vote total. And this 5-county region, Donald Trump didn't win a single one of them in the 2016 Republican primary in Michigan. In fact, in 2 of them, including the one we've just highlighted here, he finished in 3rd place in 2016. This is as he was winning the state by a double-digit margin. So, again, if Haley wants to get that statewide number up or wants to at least stabilize it where it is, I think this area is really going to have to come in for her. One other sort of big outstanding slice of vote in southeastern Michigan, we're still waiting on Livingston County, nothing there. But again, especially once you get north here, basically we could say Saginaw, it's a bit arbitrary, but once you get north of there, it's basically Trump country in small rural counties with large populations of non-college white voters, the core Trump base. You can just see what's happening here as they start to report in. You're going to see margins like that. Cumulatively, they're going to add up and they're going to buttress that Trump number statewide. Now, taking a look here at the Democratic side, overall now 10% of the vote and uncommitted over, for at least for the moment, that 15% mark. 15% statewide, 15% in congressional districts in Michigan is the threshold on the Democratic side to begin collecting delegates to the Democratic National Convention. Now, with a margin like this, Biden is going to take the lion's share of the delegates here, but the possibility that uncommitted gets delegates is certainly alive in the early returns here. But basically, the uncommitted story on the Democratic side that we're following for the rest of the night is going to be concentrated in a few places. The first is right here in Wayne County. This is the biggest of the big. This is Detroit here, but it's also home of Dearborn. And you had the mayor on from Dearborn a few minutes ago. Dearborn with a majority Arab American population. So we have obviously 85 votes only from Wayne tonight. There's going to be far, far more coming in. But that's going to tell a big part of the story here of whether uncommitted is registering. With that large Arab American and Muslim American population, is uncommitted racking up big numbers when substantial votes start to come in. And then the other type of vote, the other demographic that uncommitted might be drawing support from, we said, college counties, college students, maybe college faculty for that matter. We've certainly gotten indications on college campuses of a lot of dissent towards Joe Biden's Israel-Hamas policy. So Washtenaw County, University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, Eastern Michigan University, about 40% is in right now, and that uncommitted number continues to hover just below a quarter of the vote right there. The other major places to watch then for this uncommitted factor would be college counties, really, in the rest of Michigan. So places you would look, this is Isabella County up here. This is where Central Michigan University is. This is Kalamazoo County. Western Michigan is here. Let's go Broncos. Go up to Marquette. Oh, a beautiful county. Marquette is on Lake Superior. It's also the home of Northern Michigan University. And you could look right here in Houghton County. That's where Michigan Tech is. So we could look in these counties as they come in. We do have some vote in Isabella and Kalamazoo. I don't believe it's much. Yeah, Isabella is just a scattering, and Kalamazoo is also just a scattering. But, you know, Wayne County with that large Arab American population, and then those college counties I just looked at, that's going to tell, I think, the story here. Those would be the high watermarks probably for uncommitted in this state. And again, that question of where it ultimately lands here, and you know, a little bit of a question there, too, of is it getting some delegates? That would be more of a symbolic thing, but that would be interesting if uncommitted is collecting delegates.
Fascinating stuff here, Steve. Thank you for that. We'll be back to you soon. Today, volunteers were out on the streets of Michigan, not canvassing for any one particular candidate, but canvassing to get Michiganders to vote uncommitted in today's primary. It is a protest vote, a vote to send a message to President Biden that these voters want the White House to push Israel more forcefully toward a ceasefire in Gaza, and they do not approve of his handling of the war thus far. The organizers behind this effort had aimed to get 10,000 uncommitted votes today. That would mirror the 10,000 vote margin by which Trump beat Hillary Clinton in Michigan in 2016. It is a relatively low bar, which is one they cleared just minutes after polls closed tonight. Michigan has more than 300,000 Arab American residents and hundreds of thousands of college students. Beyond that, Wayne County, Michigan is the home of the city of Dearborn, which has the largest Muslim population per capita of any city in the United States. Just west of Wayne County is Washtenaw County, home to the University of Michigan and Eastern Michigan University. Both the state's Arab population and its college-age population have been outspoken in expressing their anger towards the current U.S. policy on the Israel-Hamas war. Those are not the only typically Democratic votes we're going to be looking at tonight. Exit polls show that in 2020, union members in Michigan backed Joe Biden by a 25-point margin. But a Fox News poll out this month showed Biden's lead among the state's union voters has fallen to 12 points, and that is outside the fairly whopping 7-point margin of error in this poll. So there is a lot of vote that Democrats will be looking both at and for when the results come in as far as what might happen in November. Joining us now is Michigan's Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. Senator Stabenow, it is an exciting night to have you with us. And thanks for joining us. As we get these vote totals in, I want to first ask you about the uncommitted vote and how you think the Biden campaign should be reaching out to these voters tomorrow.
Well, it's great to be with you again. And let me say, this is an important group of people who want to be heard and are making themselves heard. And it's very important. And I know that President Biden is listening, as he should be, and is moving forward to do a number of things that need to be done in terms of ceasefire and addressing, what has been an incredible loss of life of innocent citizens, as well as bringing hostages home. So it's important. I think it's also important to say there's another piece of the story in Michigan, I think, that is not yet focused on, which is the fact that people came out to vote. People came out to vote. We worked really hard to move up our primary because we are a very diverse state, both economically, ethnically, in every possible way. We represent America. And we saw more people vote before today in absentee ballots and early voting that did before in 2020. People were voting, excited to come out and vote. And people are voting today. So that's important to focus on as well. President Biden will overwhelmingly win Michigan, but he needs to be very respectful and pay attention. And I'm confident he will, of those people who have voted uncommitted, to send a very strong message about their concerns. I should say also, this is not new to Michigan. Back in 2012 with President Obama, we had about 10% of those who voted in the primary that voted uncommitted for various reasons. This will be more than that tonight, certainly. But it's important to pay attention to that, but also pay attention to everyone else who was voting overwhelmingly for President Biden in a very large coalition. People are working in Michigan and they know it, in good paying jobs, and they appreciate our taking on the drug companies, and women in our state certainly understand what is at stake in terms of our freedoms to make our own reproductive decisions. And they're frankly horrified after Alabama about what comes next with IVF. So we have a broad coalition. Everyone needs to be respected, and certainly the president needs to be respectful of those who were voting uncommitted as well.
Senator, given the extraordinary amount of support that the president has offered union workers, both on the picket line and through legislation, are you at all concerned about some of this polling that shows that his support among union workers may have softened between now and 2020?
Alex, I just don't believe that. I have been all over the state. I have been campaigning with the president, who gets overwhelming positive responses. We went to UAW halls a couple of weeks ago. I've been with our building construction workers and their leadership in the last 2 weeks. They're working. They're working overtime. They know where that's coming from. They know that the fact that we're rebuilding Michigan and creating more manufacturing jobs and bringing jobs home. They know that. So the polls, the polls are the polls. But I can just tell you, with all the bad polls we hear all the time, the reality is we've won every special election as Democrats. We have beat the polls, it seems like, over and over and over again. And so Michigan's a purple state. We're going to have to work really hard. But I don't believe for a minute that he has lost support, given what he has been doing to support workers in Michigan.
Senator Stabenow, Chris Hayes here. Just to follow up on that, it's interesting to hear you talk about the sort of economic status of folks in Michigan. For so long, I think, despite all the truly remarkable macroeconomic numbers, the sort of cost of living and inflation tended to cloud that out in the political discussion, in the punditry discussion. Do you think that's turned the corner in your state? Do you feel like all of these numbers, record low unemployment, investment in manufacturing, is impacting folks that you're around and campaigning with?
You know, Chris, that's a really good question, and I do think we're turning a corner. It was very frustrating for a long time, you know, when we were seeing these numbers, you know, 15 million new jobs and the best economy, more small businesses, you know, the lowest black unemployment forever, ever. And yet people weren't feeling it. But I see a change. I really do. And when I say to folks that are, when I'm in the union halls, and these are construction folks doing all of the great work, and I say, how you doing? Oh, great. Working overtime? Yeah. Do you know who did that? And now they're saying Joe Biden and Democrats, that they know it, prevailing wage, the efforts. You know, they saw the president on the picket line for the first time ever, a president out there. And they know that Donald Trump then went to a non-union place and paid people to pretend they were union workers, you know, so he could say somehow he supported auto workers. They're not fools. I mean, they know what's happening. And we're beginning to see it in other ways. You know, I talk to people who are seeing their prescription drug costs go down, or a union member who said to me, you know, my mom is on insulin and it's now $35 a month, and man, that's made a difference for her. So it's starting, and that's why I'm actually very confident. I mean, we've got work to do. We got to tell the story for sure. We have to all tell the story and not listen to every single poll, but, you know, look at what's happening on the ground, which is what I'm doing every single day. And I can tell you that, you know, I'm optimistic. I really am. And I think tonight's a part of that.
Debbie Stabenow, Senator for the great state of Michigan, with some real talk for all of us. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
This is, you know, it is great to hear from the senator about what is really happening on the ground on issues that I know you in particular have been talking animatedly about for some time. We've got more special coverage of the Michigan primary coming up right after the break.
I think the reason why we got Trump in 2016 is because people did not vote. And I understand uncommitted, but this is too important an election to be uncommitted.
Activists with the Listen to Michigan campaign are calling on Democrats to vote uncommitted instead of voting for the incumbent Democratic president, Joe Biden, in order to register discontent about the president's policy in the Israel-Hamas war. Heading into tonight, Listen to Michigan was hoping to garner at least 10,000 uncommitted votes, roughly Donald Trump's margin of victory in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. Right now, they are at over 20,000 votes. That is almost 16% of the vote across the state. Listen to Michigan now expects they will even receive a delegate to send to the Democratic convention in Chicago this summer. Joining us now is Layla Elabad, campaign manager for the Listen to Michigan campaign. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's a big night for your grassroots organization. Can I first get your thoughts on the numbers we have thus far? I think our official count is over 20,000. We have some reporting that says it could go as high as 100,000. We know that Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 154,000 in the state. Is there any chance Listen to Michigan gets to that number?
I mean, that would be amazing for us to get to that number. But right now, we know that we are emerging victorious. We had a modest expectation of 10,000 votes, and we've already doubled that just in the short time that after polling locations have closed. So we feel really good right now, and it would be amazing to reach those numbers as well.
There is some talk that you may earn a delegate to the Democratic convention. I wonder if you've kind of have a strategy for what you might do with that delegate and what the future of that delegate might be.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's just really exciting to even think about the prospect of sending a delegate and having that. And we will talk about that as our next steps. Right now, we are celebrating this victory, and you know the Palestinians are in our hearts and prayers right now, and we know that we are doing this in order to have a permanent ceasefire and put pressure on Joe Biden to change course now.
You talk about a permanent ceasefire. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about the coalition, because it seems as if there's if not two factions, two sides of it, insofar as one group of people who want to see concrete action from this White House, but then there may be another subset of individuals for whom the Biden administration has crossed effectively a red line, for whom they will not vote. They will not vote for Joe Biden in November. They may sit out the election entirely. Is that an accurate assessment? And could you give us a sense of the sort of breakdown in terms of what percentage of people are still open to a message and action from this White House?
Well, the Listen to Michigan campaign has been solely focused on the primary to send that resounding message to Joe Biden that we need a ceasefire now. We need him to listen to his core constituency, his base that put him in an office in 2020. And he needs to listen to us when we say we need a permanent ceasefire in order to save as many lives as possible. And Michiganders, especially within our community, the Arab American and Muslim American community, this aggression has affected us directly. And so when we talk about these factions within this movement, this pro-ceasefire movement, I think that there is going to be, come November, there is going to be folks that can't bring themselves to vote for Joe Biden because of that deep betrayal, not only as Muslim Americans and Arab Americans that have direct ties to Palestine and to that region, but also it feels a betrayal to our democracy that we would align ourselves, the United States would align themselves with Netanyahu and his right-wing government over the people that have been saying since October, we need a permanent ceasefire right now.
Is there a conversation inside the coalition about the possible scenario in which the sitting out of the election hands a victory to Donald Trump? Is that something that is actively discussed within the Listen to Michigan group?
Well, we know that our community that has supported Listen to Michigan, that have worked on Listen to Michigan, they're not going to vote in a monolith. So I can't speak for everyone that is part of our coalition. But what I do understand is that we know, this coalition knows that Donald Trump and his presidency was not a friend to the Muslim American and Arab American community, but most communities that were part of this coalition. But what we can say right now is we focused on the primary to send this message to Joe Biden that he needed to listen to Michiganders when we said we need a permanent ceasefire now. And come November, it's going to be Joe Biden and the Democratic Party that are going to be held accountable for handing the White House to someone like Trump.
Layla Al-Abad, thank you so much for your time tonight. We'll be watching those returns, as I'm sure you will be too. Appreciate your time.
Out there, the uncommitted vote, really, it's 15% right now statewide. We were looking at select kind of counties and areas where you really want to see what the impact is. The big one here, one of the big ones, Washtenaw, the College County. If you've been watching, it has ticked down the uncommitted total a bit. It was running about 25%. It's fallen as about half the vote has come in here. But again, the votes are coming in from a variety of places in the county. So keep an eye on that one, though. That right now is the high water mark for uncommitted. And we are now starting to get a little bit more, at least, out of Wayne. Detroit, the biggie here, the mother lode. But Dearborn, for the purposes of trying to see the uncommitted level of support, Dearborn, the biggie within Wayne that we're waiting on. And on the Republican side, just to update you, Haley has now fallen under 30%. And again, we just talked about how I think really just based on what you saw in Iowa, and in New Hampshire and South Carolina, in the types of voters she was drawing votes from in those states, she would have expected, I think you would have expected her to be doing better in the southeastern part of the state here, but she's losing all of those counties, including one that could be her best in the state. And we said, keep an eye on this zone here right around Grand Rapids. These are two big counties, Kent, where Grand Rapids is, and Ottawa County, where Holland is. Like 5% of the vote for this whole state in this primary is going to come out of Ottawa County right here. And it is early, but we do have 7%. And we told you Ottawa, one of the worst counties in the state for Donald Trump in 2016. He came in third here. He only got 19% of the vote. Let's see if this is any kind of a harbinger, this early vote. Haley right now, though, I think honestly, she wants to crack 30%. This area has got to deliver for her because Trump is just racking up huge, huge margins in all of the blue-collar, rural, and the areas with low concentrations of college degrees. And again, Haley missed her mark here in southeastern Michigan. So at 43% she was getting other primaries. She's looking like she's coming in under it. The question is just how much under? Will she even get 30% right now is a question.
Yeah, Chris, thank you, Steve. I'm really interested in if Nikki Haley stays in this race for several more weeks, whether her rhetoric around Donald Trump, which, Claire McCaskill said in the earlier hour, has gotten sharper, but she's still not quite, we're not talking about the essential sins of Donald Trump inside the Republican primary yet. That's not part of the conversation.
No.
And whether she...
He's too unfocused, as you pointed out the other night.
Lack of focus was her big...
lack of focus.
And Joe Biden's failures and Donald Trump's lack of focus, right? One wonders if this is her conscience keeping her in the race, if she doesn't actually have designs on the nomination at a convention floor fight. Whether she actually does speak her truth in a meaningful way in the closing hours of her candidacy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that's adjacent to a question I've asked myself about throughout this entire race, specifically with regards to Chris Christie and some of the things he said after he dropped out of the race, which is, who are the sliver of persuadable voters that we're talking about? People who have voted for Donald Trump, who consider themselves Republicans, partisan Republicans, who almost certainly have a low favorability of Joe Biden and Democrats, but who could be moved off of voting for Donald Trump. They exist. They're showing up, I think, in what we're seeing. And the question of, what arguments will they listen to, right? So the man is a sort of sociopathic menace who represents the worst challenge to the constitutional republic since the Confederacy, which I think is a true statement, is not the argument that I think is going to work on them. And I guess I have a hard time figuring out what that right argument is.
It's a Thanksgiving dinner table argument with your uncle.
Totally. Right? And we're watching her. I think we have watched her workshop this argument, and it has had some effect. I mean, this has been she's more successful than Ron DeSantis' argument, which is Donald Trump is too soft on trans kids,
right?
Which did not work, right? So there's something to it. She's speaking to a certain portion of that party. If the majority of the party wants Donald Trump, and that's clear. My question is, does she start to unlock something that is an argument that can be? Because I think, the sort of January 6th democracy things, which to me are so pressing, I do think if that argument worked on those folks, they probably would be off that train already, right? So I do think it's interesting to watch her rhetoric, because it's a little bit of a real-time experiment of what works. What can reach those people?
Yeah, there is a question, though. Can the party actually move beyond him unless they address the central problems?
I completely agree
If you just keep saying he's just not a winner, we'll see what that
does. He's not a winner, and he's unfocused. That's the thing. People say, what's the first thing you said with Donald Trump? Unfocused.
Lack of
insufficiently focused. That's
it may work for some people. More ahead. We will be back soon with special coverage of the results from the Michigan primary. Stay with us.
I'm hoping this uncommitted vote will at least let him know that in Michigan, it's not a wrap here. It's not a lock here. There are a lot of people here that are not happy with the job he's doing.
Who'd you just vote for? What did you just vote for?
Non-committed.
Why?
I don't like either candidate. Biden is a little too old, and Trump is too far right extreme for me.
That was a voter in Detroit, Michigan earlier today explaining his uncommitted vote in the state's Democratic primary today, not because of President Biden's handling of the conflict in Gaza, but because of his age. Joining me now is Democratic Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow. Senator McMorrow, thanks for being here tonight. We've been talking a lot this evening about the war in Gaza. We've been talking about Trump v. Haley and the schism inside the Republican Party. I am really interested to hear from you how new X factors are influencing the Michigan electorate, and specifically the question of reproductive freedoms. IVF, because of the Alabama court ruling, has become a national issue, and I wonder if you could give us a sense of how that's playing out on the ground in your state in terms of animating Democratic voters, independents, and even maybe Republicans.
Look, I can tell you, heading into this election year, I think a lot of people felt a lot of fatigue at the thought of a rematch of 2020. But in the wake of the Alabama ruling and a state representative here who's gained a lot of attention in the Republican Party recently, who's called for an outright ban on contraception, it has fired people up. There have been phone banks and events organizing all around the state because this was an issue that Michigan led on hard in 2022. Women mobilized extremely hard to codify abortion access and reproductive rights in our state constitution. And we'll be damned if that gets overdone on the federal level. So it is going to be a huge issue heading into November.
Senator Chris Hayes here. Just to follow up on that, you talk about phone banks. I'm just curious, there was a tremendous and tremendously effective statewide organizing push around that statewide constitutional amendment that secured abortion rights. Are those organizations, those folks, like, still in touch? Is there still the capacity that was there, the connections that were made, the volunteer bases, all the things you need to mobilize in 2022? Is that still extant, and will that play a factor in November?
100% it is. You know, this is something I have to give credit where credit is due on the right, that the anti-choice movement did successfully for a long time, was attempt ballot measures, even though they knew it wasn't going to be successful because it mobilized volunteers, allowed them contact information. Now we're doing it on our side. These people are engaged, they're connected. We have organizers in all 83 counties, and they are ready to go again.
I want to ask just a little bit about how the prosecutions of Donald Trump are playing out in a state like Michigan, where you have an attorney general who's actively pursuing fake electors who tried to interfere with the results of the 2020 campaign, where there was a plot to assassinate the governor of your state, where there's a strong militia presence. I mean, does that animate the Republican side as equally as it does the Democratic side? Can you talk just a little bit about how that all plays out in terms of the internal Michigan politics?
You know, it's interesting because the Republican side is going through a bit of an identity crisis right now. There are two competing state GOP parties and potentially two competing conventions. There was a court case playing out just today to decide which convention is the actual GOP convention. And it is this schism of people who will willingly fall in line behind Donald Trump, despite the fact that, yes, there was a plot to kidnap and potentially kill the governor. I was on the Senate floor below men in carrying AR-15s in full tactical gear, and most Michiganders just want to move on. But it's really hard to let go of the allure for some people of Donald Trump, who demands nothing but 100% loyalty.
Can you talk to us real quick about the young people of Michigan, which makes me sound like very much an old person. But as we get this vote in for uncommitted, there's a sizable portion of young voters in the Ann Arbor area and Ypsilanti who are voting uncommitted as a sort of sign of either mistrust or distaste for the incumbent president. And I wonder how much of an issue you think that is in terms of the general election, potentially November. How much President Biden needs to shore up support with Michigan's young?
You know, I was just at the University of Michigan last week giving a talk to young people there. And I think there was a real fear that I had, this kept me up at night, that young people were just going to stay home this election. So the fact that we do have people turning out and making their voices heard. There's a long time between now and November. I know that the administration has worked hard well before this primary to reach out and connect, particularly on the issue of the war between Israel and Gaza right now, what we're seeing happen. Hopefully the news of a brokered ceasefire comes to fruition. But, you know, engaging young people, in my mind, in Michigan is a great thing. That is exercising your right to vote now. That's going to pave a path to November that we desperately need.
Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow, great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for the insight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think it's so invaluable hearing from the people who actually understand, first of all, what she was saying about the infrastructure that has been built up
completely
in and around the question of reproductive freedom. I mean, when you talk about what the whole ball game might be actually in November, could be IVF, could be abortion, could be this sort of freedom of bodily autonomy.
And I also think that the last point she made, I think, is actually a really important one. And I hadn't thought of it this way. And I think there's something to be said for the way the Listen to Michigan campaign has gone about this, which is, there's some folks that are, you know, have run a campaign called Abandon Biden, which is like, it's done, it's over, whatever. The perspective of Listen to Michigan is that these are people who have real complaints. They're substantive complaints. They disagree with the president's policy. How do we engage them in such a way that keeps them in an active political dialogue and actively politically involved, building towards something, as opposed to feeling completely alienated, rejected? And her point there of, look, active is better than inactive. Invested is better than alienated and diffident, I think is actually a really important one for thinking about what the next 5 or 6 months into November look like.
And a good sign for representative democracy.
Completely, that's what it should be.
We believe
that's right.
that we can see change if we just speak loudly enough. All right, we're going to have more of our continuing special coverage of the Michigan Democratic primary coming up. Stay with us.
Absolutely. We voted uncommitted today, again, to put that pressure on the current administration to call for a ceasefire so that we can see peace and, yeah, just peace around the world and no more death. And so that's our goal.
Welcome back to our coverage of the Michigan primary. Let's head back over to our very own Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, what do you got for us?
Not much has changed, but two things just to point out. One, on the Republican side, we've been talking about that western Michigan area here where Haley, if she wants to, I think, crack 30% here, she's going to have to do really well. We are starting to get a little bit more. Ottawa County, where Holland is, again, 10%. She's at 30% next door. Kent County, where Grand Rapids is, we've got about a tenth of the vote in here. And again, Haley down, running at about 37%. These should be her absolute best counties in the state. These counties I just showed you, and Washtenaw and Oakland, which I was showing you earlier. And again, overall statewide, she's sitting at 29 right now. Democratic side, again, overwhelming Biden win. Uncommitted's ticked just under 15%. But we say we're looking at particular areas here. We're waiting on Dearborn. That's the biggest we're looking at. We're also looking for college counties. And we've talked about Washtenaw County, where Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan is. And so Washtenaw County right here, I could just show you the result within the county. Oh, that's, I think, take the marker off. The result within the county with about half the vote in is uncommitted's running at 21%. But here's the interesting thing we've got now. Numbers specific to the city of Ann Arbor. That's where the University of Michigan is. In Ann Arbor, the number right now is 63 to 32%. So uncommitted is hitting 32% in probably the most uncommitted friendly part of Washtenaw County, the most uncommitted friendly of perhaps the most uncommitted friendly county in the state. Right now it's running at 32%. In all other areas of Washtenaw County that are not Ann Arbor right now, Biden is running at 77% and uncommitted is running at 18%. Again, that's with half the vote in. It's sort of a mix of there's early vote in, there's absentee vote in, there's same-day vote in. None of these municipalities, none of these town cities are complete yet in their count, but there is a disparity there. That's what it's running at right now. And again, Ann Arbor, outside of Dearborn, maybe as good as it gets for uncommitted tonight.
The least committed and the least committed and the least committed. Steve Kornacki, thank you as always, my friend. So earlier this morning, on the day of the Michigan primary, this is what former President Donald Trump had to say about the president of the United Auto Workers Union.
And the auto workers, I love the auto workers, and I think they're going to vote for me, even though the head of the union was just absolutely so stupid.
That would be the Republican presidential candidate, Donald Trump, calling the president of the UAW, Shawn Fain, stupid on the day of the Michigan primary. Almost 13% of workers in Michigan are union members. That is 3 points higher than the national average. Union workers in the state are expected to lean left this evening, especially after President Biden's concerted efforts to strengthen that support. He received the UAW endorsement in January. He joined a UAW picket line outside Detroit last September, and he has passed legislation that created 30 new clean energy projects in Michigan, along with a threefold increase in private manufacturing construction. Tonight, we're going to see if all that work from T. Biden has paid off at the ballot box. Joining us now is Josh Marshall, founder and editor-in-chief of Talking Points Memo. Josh, thanks for being here tonight. What's the strategy behind calling the president of the UAW stupid on the night of the Michigan primary? Is there one, do you think?
I wouldn't say there's much of one. That's just pure Trump, right? You know, kind of, if you don't like Trump, you're stupid and an idiot and a loser and all that kind of stuff. I have to imagine that you know, Trump is going to be playing to whatever dissident vote there is within the UAW. So it's not, you know, he's not really playing for that audience, but I don't think it's strategy. I think it's personality. That's who he is. That's who Trump is.
It's just, when you look at the number of things that Biden has done for the labor movement on whole, for union workers in the state of Michigan, it's astounding. We were talking to Debbie Stabenow, the senator, earlier this evening, and Mallory McMorrow, and they sound really bullish on Biden's chances in the state, notwithstanding the very legitimate concerns that are being aired this evening with the uncommitted vote. But just his economic record, the work he has done to champion labor rights, workers' wages, what he's done on the economy writ large. When you look at the sum total of all of this, do you think the narrative of Trump's sort of cultural pull on the white working class may be grinding to a halt in a state like Michigan?
I'm not sure it's grinding to a halt. That's, you know, he definitely, that's a certain kind of hold he has. It tends to be elements of the white working class that are not unionized. There's a whole literature about the change in that vote over the last half century that is about the decline of unions, the rise of other ways that the sort of the cultural and social life of white working class voters exists when there's no longer a strong union presence. So that's different to a significant extent in Michigan. I think Democrats have reason to be fairly bullish about Michigan. You know, I saw a comment a few days ago that, you know, they don't have a chance without a radical different policy in the Middle East. You know, the race is about tied with maybe a very slight lean toward Trump right now. So, you know, Michigan is always going to be close. It's certainly Biden's record is a dramatically different one than certainly Clinton had in the 90s, and even to a great extent that Barack Obama had, a decade ago, even though obviously Obama rightly got a lot of credit for basically saving the auto industry. For unions, his union organizing and the labor movement, his record was more mixed. So Biden has gone all in on this issue. That's not just about Michigan. That's something that really informs his whole policy, across everything the administration does. So I think, that will have a positive effect. But, Michigan is always close. And I think, what we seem to be seeing with this uncommitted vote tonight is, enough for uncommitted to feel good about their result, but also Biden doing well enough to not feel like he's caught out or something. So I think overall for the Democratic Party, this is a pretty good result out of tonight. So, I think they have reason to be bullish.
When you look at the sort of the lines in the sand, as it were, Josh, when it comes to the Republican side of the aisle, Nikki Haley not doing as well as she did in previous primaries, Donald Trump seemingly consolidating support. What's your expectation for the Republican race?
My expectation for the Republican race as of a year ago was that Donald Trump was 100% the nominee. I've never had any question about that. I do think that out of Iowa, New Hampshire, and even into South Carolina, there was that fairly consistent 40% of basically no's. And look, Nikki Haley is basically a placeholder candidate. She's consolidating the Republicans and Republican-leaning independents who just aren't ready to get on board with Donald Trump again. That doesn't mean most of them won't vote for him eventually in November, but this is certainly a better result than Donald Trump got in the first few contests. And I would say he's, should be happy about, a little happier about that than he's been about, the results in the first 3 or 4 contests.
Maybe he can lay off calling the UAW president stupid next time. I mean, might do even better. Josh Marshall.
Yeah, might do even better.
Thank you for your time. We'll have more of our special coverage of the Michigan primary right after this quick break.
I can understand where they are coming from. I don't support that. I feel like often when people vote like uncommitted or third party, that ends up hurting the Democratic Party more than the Republican Party. So there's a danger to that.
If you are just joining us in tonight's special election coverage of Michigan's presidential primary, NBC News is projecting Donald Trump to win 16 of Michigan's 55 Republican National Convention delegates. The other 39 will be awarded on Saturday during a GOP state party convention, or maybe possibly conventions plural. Because if you have not yet heard, the Michigan Republican Party is currently a bit of a goat rodeo, fighting literally and figuratively over who their leader is. Either Trump loyalist and election denier Christina Caramo, or Pete Hoekstra, the guy a faction of the party voted in to replace Caramo. Now, today, a judge in Michigan ruled that Hoekstra is now the rightful leader of the Republican Party in the state, and the judge has enjoined Ms. Caramo from accessing the party's mail and bank accounts. I mean, with winners like this, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. With election, this is what happens when you have election deniers.
Well, that's part
running
of
your
it.
party.
That's part
they
of it.
don't like ceding power.
They don't. And also just the kind of people that have been attracted into the party infrastructure in the Trump era.
Yes.
I mean, we all saw the, in Arizona when they were doing their, forensic audit and they had the UV to find the Chinese bamboo paper in the ballot. But I mean, those are the people that show up,
yes.
right? So those are the kinds of people that are taking over these parties. And a big question for me is in Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, all of which have truly dysfunctional Republican parties, how much it's going to matter. How much is that going to matter on the ground come November? Maybe it doesn't matter in the presidential. Maybe it does matter at the congressional district level, statewide races. I don't know. But those parties are wild, wild situations.
It's a wild situation led by a wild individual. That is going to do it for us tonight. MSNBC's coverage of the Michigan primary continues on The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Alex. Thank you, Alex and Chris, for this mini election night coverage. We're going to return halfway to regular programming in this hour. A lot of numbers to look at on the screen, but it's another edition of The Last Word here.
Have a great day.
Thank you both. Thank you. Well, once again tonight, in the Michigan primary, President Joe Biden is getting a much bigger percentage of the vote from his party than Donald Trump is getting from his party. NBC News projects that President Joe Biden is the winner of the Michigan Democratic primary and that Donald Trump is the winner of the Michigan Republican primary. At this hour, Joe Biden has 79% of the vote and Donald Trump has 66% of the Republican vote. Let's go straight to Steve Kornacki at the big board for the latest numbers.
Yeah, Lawrence. So, let's start on that Republican primary because about a fifth of the vote, 1 in 5 votes, are now tabulated here. And you can see all the counties lighting up in Trump's color. I think the headline here on the Republican side, obviously, is that Donald Trump wins. But remember what Haley's been getting so far. In New Hampshire, she got 43% of the vote. In South Carolina, just last Saturday, she got 40% of the vote. She made that idea of 40% kind of consistently a centerpiece of her speech Saturday night. Well, here we are in Michigan that has the same rules that South Carolina had. There is no party registration in Michigan. Nobody registers as a Democrat, as a Republican, as an independent. Anybody who wants can vote in this Republican primary here. And yet some of the strengths that Haley had in South Carolina, some of the areas where she was strongest, that was able to bring her up to 40% statewide, and in fact, win a congressional district in South Carolina, the areas in Michigan that are most demographically similar to those areas, she's not performing nearly as well in Michigan in them. The biggest of the headline right here would be for Haley right now in Washtenaw County. Now, this is a Democratic county in the general election, University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan University. But I highlight this one because, first of all, so much of the vote is in Washtenaw County. And second of all, because demographically, Haley has been appealing to voters who have college degrees, voters who live in suburbs, voters who have higher incomes. I mean, that is almost the definition of Washtenaw County. And yet even here, with more than 80% of the vote in, she's losing to Donald Trump by almost 10 points. This should and very well could be Haley's best county in the state. And there she is running at her total in New Hampshire. You see the same thing here in Oakland County. 2/3 of the vote is in. This is the big suburb just north of Detroit. You got Oakland here, which is the white-collar suburbs, and you got Macomb County here, which is the blue-collar suburbs. This is expected to go, Macomb is, heavily for Donald Trump. It was Oakland County tonight where Nikki Haley, if she was going to really get to that 40% level again, this would be the kind of county she would need to be winning. Instead, 2/3 of the vote in, she's losing it 2-1. And if those are the levels she's getting in what are supposed to be her best counties, well, look what's happening to her in counties that we knew would be her worst in the state. Basically, I say if you draw a line, we'll do it a bit arbitrarily. North of Saginaw, you start at Bay City, go north here. We expected just about all these counties to be heavily Trump counties. Individually, they're small, they're rural, they're working class. They have lots of white voters without college degrees. That is the core of the Trump base. And you can just see as they're starting to come in, these are the kinds of margins Donald Trump is racking up in them. 60 points, 54 points. Let's go to the thumb, 52 points right there in Huron County. So collectively, these do add up to something, and they are padding Donald Trump's lead. And so what this adds up to on the Republican side here right now is Nikki Haley. Again, 43 New Hampshire, 40 South Carolina. She's under 30, and that number has been trending down. Because if you look at it, those counties I just showed you, Oakland and Washtenaw, which are supposed to be among her best in the state, they are disproportionately a large share of the overall statewide vote. Their sort of share of the vote is going to decline as these other counties that are more similar to those big Trump landslides I just showed you start filling in. In other words, there's a potential here this number could drop further for Haley, and there's a potential here this Trump number could go even higher. The biggest single outstanding variable continues to be this area of western Michigan. In the past, in the 2016 Republican primaries, this was Trump's biggest area of weakness on the Republican side. This is an area in general elections that has turned away from Trump and the Republicans in reaction to Donald Trump. So it's a pretty big share of the vote. About 17% statewide is going to come out of this region. We're starting to get votes in here. Hasn't really changed in the last half an hour or so. But I think this is going to go a long way to determining, if Haley is able to get back north of 30% or if that number, pardon me, drops even further.
Steve, what do you see on the Democratic side?
And on the Democratic side, obviously Biden wins again. And the question has been uncommitted here. Two things on uncommitted. First is sort of a mechanical question with delegates. On the Democratic side, if you get 15% of the vote statewide, if you get 15% of the vote in any congressional district, you can start collecting delegates. Uncommitted right now running just under 15% statewide. But again, take a look at Washtenaw County, because what I just said on the Republican side stands on the Democratic side. Big college county, University of Michigan. Uncommitted is the vehicle for folks who are upset with Joe Biden's Israel-Hamas policies. Well, we've seen so much activism opposed to Biden on that front on college campuses in places like Ann Arbor. So you would expect this to be potentially the best uncommitted does statewide, or one of the best locales statewide for uncommitted. Half the vote in Washtenaw County is running at 21% here, and there's a split within Washtenaw County in Ann Arbor itself, where the University of Michigan is. Uncommitted to getting 32% of the vote. In the rest of the county outside of Ann Arbor, uncommitted is only getting 18% of the vote. And when it comes to this uncommitted question, the one big thing we're waiting on is within this county, Wayne County. This is the biggie. This is Detroit. But for our purposes tonight in trying to measure uncommitted, the city we're keeping an eye on here is Dearborn, Michigan. Population 110,000, majority Arab American, highest concentration per capita of Muslim Americans of any city in the United States of America. So we're waiting to see what the margin on that looks like within the city of Dearborn. But overall, on the Democratic side, Biden here is running close to 80%. That number, Wayne's going to have a lot to say about this, but that number could track up a little bit. And again, a question there, if there's a district maybe where uncommitted is able to pick off a delegate or two is really you want to call that suspense. That's the suspense on the Democratic side.
Steve, your coffee break time has arrived. We're going to need you later in the hour, but we're going to bring on a few more people to give you a rest. Thank you, Steve.
Got it.
Thank you. And joining us now is Simon Rosenberg, Democratic strategist and author of Hopium Chronicles on Substack. So, Simon, on the Democratic side, no one's bothering to mention it, but there is a human being running against Joe Biden. And that human being, who's a member of Congress, Dean Phillips, so far has 2.8% of the vote. That is 10% of the vote that Nikki Haley has gotten. Nikki Haley is at 28% as of right now, flirting with 30%. And so when you put Joe Biden up against an actual human being in the Democratic Party, that human being can get all of 2.8% versus Donald Trump, who, when he goes against a human being in the Republican primary, loses 30%, and in previous primaries 40%. And the question tonight that we don't know, because there's no exit polls, congratulations, exit poll business. They're doing nothing tonight. So the only question that matters on the Republican side of that primary is how many of those Nikki Haley voters will not vote for Donald Trump in November, and we have no exit polling information to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, as you've mentioned, Lawrence, and we've talked in this show, I mean, one of the most remarkable statistics that we've seen so far in the election is these Haley voters in the three early states' willingness to not just not vote for Trump, but to vote for Biden. I mean, it's a big consequential event. But I will just say that if Trump got 60% in South Carolina and it was a romp and a blowout and is getting in the mid-60s here tonight and it's a big win, then Joe Biden getting 80% is a really big win, a really good night for Joe Biden. And I think that this idea that somehow this uncommitted movement would somehow alter the Democratic Party's trajectory, I think hasn't happened tonight. I mean, remember that, Barack Obama in 2012, when he was running for re-election, the uncommitted got 11% of the vote. It's going to be probably 14, 15 tonight, really not a huge difference. And Obama went on to win the general election against Michigan native Mitt Romney by 9 points. And so I don't think things have really changed tonight in the Democratic Party. I don't think this was a good night for the uncommitted vote. It was a good night for Joe Biden. I will say that once again, and we don't have a lot of polling in Michigan, but the polls that were done in February had Trump above, winning by 50 points or more. He's winning tonight by high 30s, low 40s. So once again, based on public polling, Donald Trump is underperforming the public polls that are available to us, as he's done in the 3 early states earlier this election cycle.
So what we've seen since 1968, which was one of the first times we ever saw it, when an incumbent president was up for re-election and someone within that party challenged the incumbent president. The worst thing that can happen for the incumbent president is that challenger, that human being, get votes. That's what Lyndon Johnson saw in New Hampshire. Gene McCarthy got 42% of the vote. And Lyndon Johnson dropped out of the presidential race, not because he thought Gene McCarthy could beat him to the nomination. He was sure he would get the nomination at the convention in Chicago, because that's where it was really going to be decided. It wasn't going to be decided by primaries. But the signal Lyndon Johnson got from that New Hampshire vote was, I can't win in November. This is too much weakness within my own party for me to win in November. And that's why he dropped out. When you look at this vote on uncommitted, which is one that I fully respect strategically of the people who want to cast to deliver this expression of this is based on a policy that we care about. We think the president is failing us on this one policy and only on this one policy, on no other policy. This is not a vote for a person. They could have put up a candidate. They could have gone to Dean Phillips. Dean Phillips says he wants a ceasefire. He said in December he wants a ceasefire. They refused to vote for Dean Phillips, and they cast a vote that says to the president, we're not with you tonight. That's all that vote says. We are uncommitted tonight. And what I've been hearing from certainly from the politicians who've been leading that movement in Michigan is none of them are saying they won't be with Joe Biden in November against Donald Trump.
Yeah, and we also have to be a little bit careful tonight in not exaggerating the role of a delegate or two here. I mean, I've helped run the delegate operations on the floor of Democratic conventions, and having a delegate or two is, not a significant achievement. I mean, many times during presidential primaries that a cause or a candidate will pick up a few delegates here or there, because there became a question of how much energy should the Biden campaign really put into this to deny the 15%. And they've made a decision that they could handle, there being this kind of opposition of a delegate or two at the Democratic convention, given that there are thousands of delegates, right? And so, I think it's just very important to recognize that, to not exaggerate on our side the significance of what's happened tonight. I mean, I think, obviously, I also just want to say for the record, that Joe Biden has been for a ceasefire. He actually negotiated a ceasefire. He actually is trying to negotiate a ceasefire right now. I mean, and if you look at, I just looked at the Economist YouGov poll from last week. Among Democrats, Biden's approval on foreign policy is in the upper 70s. His disapproval is in the low 20s. The party is with him on what he's doing. I mean, you can be for a ceasefire and still be for Joe Biden, backing Joe Biden and what he's doing in the Middle East. This is an important discussion we're having in the family. We're not all together on this, and it's important that we air this out and continue a respectful debate inside the family. It's a tough issue. But I think this notion that there is some kind of huge backlash against Biden on this issue, I think, has been disproven tonight, actually not proven, in my view.
Well, I want to do both. I want to give that movement the strategic respect it deserves, especially including the decision not to put up a candidate, the decision to say, we simply want to deliver this message at the ballot box. We're going to actively go out and vote, and we're going to vote for a blank. We're going to do that as a way of expressing ourselves, which is much I don't want to say weaker, but it is a softer objection than going out there the way voters went out there for Gene McCarthy in 1968, because those voters were 100% against Lyndon Johnson when they cast that vote. And there was no way in the world they were going to vote for Lyndon Johnson in November.
Right, or Ted Kennedy in 1980, or some of the Haley voters in this election, right? It's important, the distinction you're drawing here, which is that there isn't an opposition movement of significance inside the Democratic Party. And I think we can have a respectful debate. We don't have to agree on everything as Democrats. That's what a democracy is all about. This is a healthy debate we're having, as long as it stays respectful and we stay on the same team. And I think that, it is, to your point, I take your point, Lawrence, right, that this was a thoughtful and serious way of addressing concerns about the Biden presidency. But I also think that I'm proud of the president tonight. I think this was a very big win for him. And I don't think it really alters the trajectory of the Democratic primary in any way. But we'll see, right? We got a long way to go, elections to come, and I'll be back here with you many, many times in the coming months, digesting what's going on. But I think that I go back to this basic reality of where we are. Since Dobbs in 2022, right, Democrats keep overperforming, Republicans keep struggling, and it's why I'm so optimistic about what's going to happen this fall.
And Michigan is one of the places where Democrats have consistently overperformed. Simon Rosenberg, thank you very much for starting off our discussions tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And when we come back, Michigan voters saw billboards as they went to the polls showing a direct line from Alabama's in vitro fertilization ban to Donald Trump boasting about overturning Roe versus Wade, which made it all possible in Alabama. That's next.
First of all, I've always voted Democrat. I cannot even fathom Donald Trump getting back in. Honest to God, I get sick to my stomach just even thinking about it. So, yeah, I got to come out here and do my civil duty and vote.
Voters in Michigan began seeing messages like this one on billboards today, proving that Donald Trump's boast about overturning Roe versus Wade is the only reason Alabama can now ban in vitro fertilization. Vice President Kamala Harris brought that same message to Michigan as part of her Fight for Reproductive Freedom tour.
Women have been having miscarriages in toilets in our country, have been denied access to emergency care because of what has been happening, and then, as the governor said most recently, putting access to IVF at risk. So on the one hand, the proponents are saying that an individual doesn't have a right to end an unwanted pregnancy, and on the other hand, the individual does not have a right to start a family. The previous president of the United States then openly talks about how he is proud of what has resulted. Proud. The people of Michigan cannot sit back and take comfort without also understanding that elections matter and that there is a full-on concerted effort to pass a national ban, which would mean the people of Michigan would not be as safe.
Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Hillary Scholten of Michigan. She was sitting right next to the vice president there. If we just had that frame a little bit wider. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. How important are the issues that the vice president was talking about in what we're seeing in the results in tonight's primary?
First of all, thank you so much for having me, Lawrence. It's an honor to be here speaking on behalf of the voters of my district. And, they were top of mind for voters as they were heading to the polls. In Michigan in 2022, we passed a historic ballot initiative codifying reproductive rights into our state constitution. But voters here know that those rights could all be taken away if a Republican-controlled majority passes a nationwide abortion ban. And I talk to voters every single day for whom this is still a top issue for them heading into 2024.
We getting different reactions from voters today who did vote for Joe Biden. I want to listen to Andrea in Grand Rapids. I think the control room has it almost ready, or not. Okay, never mind, control room. We were going to go to Grand Rapids because that's the district we're talking about here. What we were hearing from Biden voters today are concerns about the issues like this specifically, and then stressing Joe Biden's experience and what they call his success in office. And so that the achievement list of the Biden administration is something that we were hearing bits and pieces of it back from voters today.
Yeah. It's absolutely true. And we see the evidence of it throughout my district. The bipartisan infrastructure law at work, replacing lead pipes throughout my district, investing in our airport. And again, policies that the administration has taken to protect women's reproductive freedom. It's on the record. And the contrast could not be clearer, especially in the wake of this Alabama Supreme Court decision surrounding IVF. Deeply personal issue to so many people. And, what happens in Alabama is not going to stay in Alabama. The voters know this. 125 Republicans have co-sponsored a bill recognizing a fetal right to life without an exception to protect a woman's right to make her family whole, a family's right to make their family whole through IVF.
And that's a bill that if it ever got to Joe Biden, he would veto instantaneously. There's no doubt about it. And Republicans in the Senate have also refused to even allow a vote that the Democrats in the Senate wanted to have on protecting in vitro fertilization.
It's true. Senator Tammy Duckworth is expected to try to bring her bill up, protecting the right to build a family, to the Senate floor. Republicans are saying they're going to block it. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the House's counterpart to that bill. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that that bill gets a vote, including bringing it by a discharge petition if we have to. We're going to hold Republicans accountable to this. They're trying to backtrack now. You can hear their tire screeches around the world as they get their talking points memo from the National Republican Party. But as the first woman and mother in history to represent my district, I don't need anybody to give me a memo on how to talk about women's reproductive freedom. This is a deeply personal issue. It belongs with the women and their doctors themselves, and not with these politicians in Washington who can't even understand the basic biological concepts of how this works. It's been painful trying to listen to them, twist themselves into knots about how they can support these bills and also IVF at the same time. Again, we don't have to resort to hyperbole about these things. The facts simply speak for themselves. Republicans have voted against women's rights, trusting women with their own bodies, these critical decisions, time and time again. And women are speaking up, especially even in places like traditionally conservative West Michigan, where I come from, many voters voting for the very first time for pro-choice candidates.
We don't know yet how many uncommitted voters there are in your district tonight voting that way. Surely you know them. Surely you've spoken to them. They've spoken to you. Are any of them or many of them telling you that they won't vote for Joe Biden in November? And what are you telling them?
I'm telling them that the beautiful part of this democracy is that they have this process through which they can register their complaints and their feelings. And I think, that is one thing that we have seen in this process. This is democracy at work. And, I think the numbers will remain to be seen. Obviously, Joe Biden was the decisive winner in the Democratic primary tonight. We are squaring off again for a Trump-Biden rematch. And I think when voters are presented with that stark contrast of Joe Biden's record and Trump's record, Joe Biden's vision for America and Trump's vision for America, that contrast will will just send voters rushing to the polls again for Joe Biden, as they did in 2022, because we've seen the devastating consequences of a Trump presidency, and we know that a second term could be even worse.
Congresswoman Hillary Scholten, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Lawrence.
And coming up, we'll get more of the numbers, but as of now, Joe Biden is headed to a much bigger victory in Michigan among Democrats than Donald Trump is headed for among Republicans in Michigan. We heard Republican voters in Michigan's primary today explain their vote for Donald Trump by repeating Donald Trump's 2020 election lie. Michigan's Barbara McQuaid's new book explains how Trump brainwashed those voters. Barbara McQuaid joins us next.
I voted for President Joe Biden. I feel that we need to continue the success, the path that we are on currently, and also because we need someone who knows how to be the president, will keep us safe, will keep the people of this country safe, and will keep democracy safe.
And do you have any concerns about another Biden administration?
I do not. I feel that both he and Vice President Harris will be successful together as a team.
Republican primary voters in Warren, Michigan, memorized Donald Trump's lie about the 2020 election and recited it earlier today.
It was all rigged, I think. I think it was rigged with the ballots.
I just know that everyone I spoke to voted for Donald J. Trump, and it was a lot of people.
Our next guest, Michigan's Barbara McQuaid, writes in her new book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America, that the Trump election lie, quote, provided justification for the coup attempt of 2020 and has given rise to the election denier movement, which remains in place to justify future anti-democratic power grabs. As of April 2022, fully 68% of Republicans, millions of Americans, were still under the influence of disinformation about stolen elections, despite the fact that congressional investigations, audits, and court challenges had turned up no evidence to support the claims. Joining us now is Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. attorney and a law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She's co-host of the podcast #Sisters-in-Law and is an MSNBC legal analyst. She is the author of the new book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America, which is out now, and I'm happy to say in my hands. There it is. There's the camera. Barbara, what's so fascinating about this for me is you get into a thing that I've just been thinking about vaguely and mostly in wonder. How do you get these people to believe this nonsense? Why can't they separate fact from fiction? But you actually get in here and show which wires connect to what.
Yeah, so if you look at history, what Mussolini and Hitler did, the tactics really haven't changed. Maybe the delivery mechanism has changed a little bit with social media, cable television, but the messages are very similar to the ones that we saw Hitler and Mussolini use. Very simple messages, repeatable little slogans like "Stop the Steal." What Hitler wrote about in Mein Kampf, make the lie big. Everybody tells little lies, but would not have the audacity to tell a lie about something so significant. And so the fact that the lie that Trump has told about a stolen election is so big that, ironically, it becomes more believable. So those tactics have been documented throughout history. The
reason why I always thought we could just assume away that part of history is that those dictators all controlled their news media. There was no other voice in Russia than Stalin and the Soviet Union or in Germany than Hitler. But what we have here, what's happened is the voter has selected, in a way, to shut off all other information source and take the Fox propaganda and all the right wing and the Trump propaganda.
Yeah, you know, we have now sorted ourselves into news bubbles where we listen to one side of information or another on social media. You know, you heard that woman say, all my friends voted for Donald Trump. I'm sure she is in a Facebook group with a group of people, and perhaps she watches Fox News. So all she ever hears is the repeat of these ideas of a rigged election and that the investigations against Donald Trump are voter interference. And so she lives in that ecosphere. So in some ways, you're raising a good point that it replicates some of those controlled medias of prior decades.
How do you penetrate it?
Yeah, I think a couple of ways. One is we have to get people out of their basements and off the internet and into the real world. We need to be engaging with people on a human scale and not just talking at each other online. Online people are horrible. We are horrible to each other. We hide behind false personas or even just the nastiness that can be there when you're not seeing a human being face to face. So I think we have to see people face to face. I also think we have to understand that when someone has been duped, the last thing they want to hear is how foolish they have been. When I was a prosecutor, we often dealt with crime victims, people who were the victims of fraud, and they felt shame in having fallen for these things. So I think we have to show people grace. We have to ask them what is the evidence that they are citing and pointing to reach their conclusions, and try to help them see that evidence is necessary for us to reach conclusions. But I think we have to do it with grace and not with dunking on people by telling them, I told you so.
Michigan is one of the great places to study this, since there's been, you know, those people who tried to kidnap and murder their governor. There's been this outburst of the most fanatical kind of behavior at the extreme end of what this book is about.
Yeah, and you know, one of the points I make in the book is that how disinformation is creating dangers to public safety and the rule of law. And so when people are out there ginning up false claims, people become very angry. Why is this happening? Why isn't our law enforcement doing something about this? And so they become inclined to take the law into their own hands, which is what we saw with the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer and make a citizen's arrest, or what we saw on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. People didn't like what they heard, and they thought it was so unjust that they were going to take the law into their own hands. And that's when things become chaotic and incredibly dangerous.
Having studied this more closely than the rest of us have, where are you in the hope versus hopelessness curve?
Yeah, I worry that it's going to get worse before it gets better, but I do think there's hope. I think there are a couple things that we need to do. One is we need to change some laws and have more regulation in social media. We've allowed these giants to grow up, and in many ways they've created wonderful, innovative products, but without any regulation, they will defeat us with artificial intelligence and all the other things, and there are some modest proposals there for regulation. But I also think that we need to persuade people about the importance of truth. I think some people have been duped by the lies that have been fed to them in recent years, but I think there are many other people who are willing to go along with the con because they are choosing tribe over truth. And so they want to align themselves with a particular party, and it doesn't matter to them what the facts are. You know, Donald Trump could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. And I think he's right, and we need to care again that if we're going to have a democracy, then facts matter.
How much of it is Donald Trump? When Donald Trump goes away, which is either next year or 4 years from now, does this stuff start to deflate?
I don't know, but he certainly was the disruptor who caused it. But we now see a lot of people who have watched and learned his tactics. I worry that the next one who comes along could be even better at it. But we see people like Jim Jordan in Congress, who is leading investigations into the weaponization of government, which is, of course, just turning investigations on their head. We have seen members of the Republican Party try to impeach Joe Biden based on not just lack of information, but false information. And so I worry that now that this tactic is in their hands, that we can see other people try to wield it.
Barbara McQuaid, great to have you here on Michigan's Big Night. Thank you very much for joining us. Barbara's book is called Attack from Within, right here. It is available right now. And coming up, we will get the latest numbers from Michigan and see how Joe Biden is still winning a much bigger percentage of the vote in the Democratic primary than Donald Trump is winning in the Republican primary. That's next.
Paul Krugman, in his article, said he was going to vote, his New York Times article said he was going to vote for Biden, and he could give it the answer in 2 words, and they were Donald Trump. I think there's a better reason to vote for Biden. I think he has a continuing vision of where we can go, and certainly the vision that Donald Trump purports to give is certainly not one I would buy into, and I don't think any other Americans should.
And we are back on Michigan primary night. Steve Kornacki is still with us at the big board. Steve, is Joe Biden's winning percentage still holding?
Yeah, it is. We can go over to the Democratic side here. He's actually hit 80% now. You can see about a third is in on the Democratic side. It's been relatively slow tonight in terms of the pace of the vote returns. The state had been indicating that. It's kind of been a steady trickle, I would say. But the pattern is pretty much settled in, where in most counties here, uncommitted is hovering somewhere around 10%. And then there are a couple exceptions we've talked all about. Washtenaw County, where Ann Arbor is, again, uncommitted just over 20% right there, about half the vote in. The big sort of unfinished piece of the puzzle here in Michigan, the biggest by far, is in Wayne County. You know, like almost a quarter of the Democratic vote comes out of Wayne County. Detroit is the heavy hitter, but so here is Dearborn, Michigan. We've talked about Dearborn with the majority Arab American population. And it's not just Dearborn. There's other parts around Dearborn in Wayne County, too, with large Arab American, Muslim American populations. So that'll kind of, when we finally get fuller picture from Wayne County, I think that'll really answer exactly how uncommitted it's going to fall here. And if you look down in this area, there is a congressional district, the 12th congressional district, where it is possible, based on what we're seeing now, uncommitted might take a delegate. But otherwise, Biden on pace here to win probably, or very possibly, all the other delegates in the state. So you see Biden 80% there. Wayne County is the big thing. You just want to see if we're following the story of uncommitted. On the Republican side here, Trump right now is sitting, you see, at 67. That Haley number, it's slow, but it continues to fall. We made a note when she fell under 30. Now she's fallen under 28% of the vote. And again, about a third of the vote has come in here. The problem for Haley is the vote that has come in. I mean, the problem for Haley, obviously, is she's losing by this margin. But the thing she was trying to emphasize in South Carolina and New Hampshire was that, hey, there's 40%, she was saying, of the Republican Party in these primaries that wants to vote against Trump. Well, that's not what you're seeing here. And the problem for her is the votes from what were supposed to be her strongest counties. We talked about Oakland County. We talked about, for her, Washtenaw County. Places like that have a lot of college-educated voters, higher income suburbs, places like that. She's done very well there in South Carolina, very well in those places in New Hampshire. But she's really not hitting anywhere near those levels in those counties in Michigan. And those are supposed to be her best counties in the state. And also those counties right now are disproportionately making up the statewide total. They are right now kind of punching above their weight in terms of the total vote in the state. You can see all these blank gray counties here up in the UP. You know, they're small in terms of population, but collectively they add up. And Trump is getting 75, 80% more of the vote in counties like this. So it's a long way of saying a third of the vote is in right now. But if you start to look at the pattern that's taking hold here, you see Trump at 67, Haley now under 27. I think it's possible Trump could move this up to 70%. And maybe over 70% before all the vote is in. And this Haley number could fall to about 25% or so. Again, there is an X factor here in western Michigan that we know outside of those counties I showed you in southeastern Michigan. We figured this would be a struggle for Trump here based on the past. But even in this part of the state, look at that. He's at 61% in Ottawa. This was basically his worst county in 2016, the last time he ran. So he could end up. 70% is not impossible for him here.
Steve Kornacki, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks. We'll be right back.
I mean, listen, Donald Trump is old. I mean, age is nothing but a number. I mean, I can tell you, listen, I'm 61. Do I feel it? No. Joe Biden is getting it done. Age is just a number.
NATO is a bulwark against Russian aggression. And he was ready to walk out of that. There are other ways he treated the people of Muslim religious background, his dirty mouth I think he's pretty much an asshole, to coin a phrase. And it's terrifying to me at 80 to think that he would be one of the last presidents. He could decimate social programs that I've been committed to and worked on for a very long time. And so there's a whole variety, as well as his personal way of dealing with people and the world.
The latest returns in Michigan show that Joe Biden is winning at this hour 80% of the Democratic presidential primary vote. Donald Trump is winning at this hour 67% of the Republican primary vote. Nikki Haley is taking 27% of the Republican primary vote away from Donald Trump. There are no exit polls tonight to indicate how many Haley voters intend to vote for Donald Trump in November, how many will refuse to vote for Donald Trump in November. President Biden has just issued a statement following his win in the Michigan primary, the unsurprising win, saying, "I want to thank every Michigander who made their voice heard today. Exercising the right to vote and participating in our democracy is what makes America great." The president goes on to list all of the Biden-Harris administration achievements that he believes relevant to the people in Michigan, domestic achievements. And then he says, President Biden says, "For all this progress, there is so much left to do. Donald Trump is threatening to drag us even further into the past as he pursues revenge and retribution. He proudly brags that he is the reason Roe versus Wade was overturned in this country because of Donald Trump. Women's lives are at risk. Doctors face the prospect of criminal penalties for doing their jobs, and families desperately trying to have children are having access to fertility treatments ripped away. Now Donald Trump wants to ban abortion nationwide, including here in Michigan." That is part of President Biden's statement upon winning his now 80% of the vote in the Democratic presidential primary in Michigan. That is tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts now.